Okay, and we've arrived at segment number 3. And along with Matt and Josh, we have a special guest. It's Bob from the Bend and Scoop podcast. Bob, why don't you plug your wares here while you've got our audience listening?
All right, thanks so much. My podcast is focused primarily on indie music, indie rock, and we're also really promoting mom and pop record shops. So it's kind of a twofold thing. I'm trying to play music that I think doesn't get enough exposure. A lot of it's driven by the fact that a lot of friends my age still are stuck in that same classic rock rut. Nothing wrong with that. A lot of the albums you guys are going through during the last few episodes, and this one as well, cover that spectrum. But it's just more of the newer indie rock type stuff that I'm trying to share. And I also always wanted to play DJ, so it's just a chance for me to get to do that. It's more like a narrated mixtape more than anything else. And then at the end of each episode, I'll have somebody on from another podcast, typically another music podcast, and just talk to them about their experience with records and music and so forth.
And one thing, Bob, that I always thought was we did the album The Who Sell Out a while back that was sort of designed as a pirate radio station in some ways. Yep. Yes. And when I listen to your show, there's elements of that Who Sell Out ethos in there, I feel like, at times.
Yeah, because it's a real anachronistic thing where I'm playing, mostly music from the last 5 or 10 years, but I'm pulling in clips from movies and radio from like when I was a teenager in the, late 70s, early 80s. So it's like, what if back then I was getting to listen to this type of music now? So it's a weird mishmash, but I like it.
Well, and we talked quite a bit on the podcast about, we looked at the Lollapalooza poster the other day. And I think Josh made the line that after line 6 of the Lollapalooza poster, it got a little bit hazy for him. Josh, I don't want to misquote you right there, but would you agree with that?
That is accurate. I didn't know anybody after line 6.
And the funny thing is we consider ourselves to be modern music listeners, even though we do a retro podcast. We Matt is a guy that used to send a CD, right? Matt, I don't want to take your thunder, but a CD every single year of 20 tracks that he liked every single year.
Yep. No, and I was listening to Bob. I was listening to your podcast the last couple of days, and I'm blown away. It's first of all, it's great. I love it. That music is right up my alley, and you also have, and I like that you also have a Spotify playlist that you put all the music on from the podcast, and so you kind of put it all up there. So if people want to go back or whatever, they can do that. And I looked through that playlist the other day, and I was like, I don't know any of these bands. I was just like, and I'm like, this is great. Like, this is a great place for me to go to listen to this stuff. So so that's another plug too, because that's it's just great rock music. A lot of times people say rock is dead. It's not around anymore, and it's maybe that's true for the radio and the normal ways of hearing music, but it's certainly not true in the more of the underground indie scene for sure.
Yeah, thanks so much. And a lot of it's just stuff that I heard about from others because I was on a music message board. It was CMJ, College Music Journal, had a message board back in the early 2000s, and I got on there and we would send each other mix CDs and stuff, and so that's how I really kind of broadened my horizons, even further. Because I used to think, wow, I listen to the Replacements. I'm super edgy, and they're great, but I mean that's only scratching the surface on that sort of thing.
Right.
Well, and you sound a lot like me, Bud, because one of the big things I want to do is I want to listen to new music, but not in a way where I try to listen to new music like I listen to my old music, right? And so finding stuff that evolves me, but also can tie in along the way. And that's what I love about your show. Yep.
So it's really just kind of a curated playlist. And there's a couple of little weird tweaks. Like I always throw a hidden track, quote unquote, after the 10 that I list, kind of a throwback to that 90s trend of every CD, every album used to have that hidden track at the end.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
So there's little nods to that era as well.
Well, that's awesome. And if you haven't had a chance to listen, Bob, do you want to plug where people can hear it?
Sure.
Presences?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you could go straight to the website, bendandscoop.com, or you can subscribe on Apple, basically anywhere but Spotify. Because of the musical content and nature, that when I first launched the podcast, Spotify kind of gave me the old heave-ho. But
oh, geez.
Everything else we're pretty good on so far.
Okay, and we're also
you can listen to the playlist on Spotify though.
Yes,
all the podcast.
Yeah, every song we've played in sequential order from episode 1 through this week is episode 51 on Friday, and every Friday is when we release 8 a.m. Central. We've cumulatively added those on there. There's a handful of tracks that aren't on Spotify for licensing or availability or whatever, but most of them are.
Nice. Yeah, the Trout Mask replica of playlist tracks, which is the only album that we did on Spotify, I believe. No, there were two, because the Faust album also was.
Faust was not on Spotify. Yeah. And
so Captain Beefheart and Spotify have a beef, apparently.
Yeah. Only for that album, apparently. They apparently don't like. Yeah.
Okay.
Bizarre found music.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and Bob, you got there's 27 hours worth of music on that playlist right now. So there's, I was like, whoa, I got my work cut out for me to go through all this. So it's good stuff. Though, so it'll be fun.
It's really added up, with 11 songs an episode, now 51 episodes. It's gotten to be pretty extensive, and there's some anomalies in there because this past year, the Friday happened to be on Christmas and happened to be on New Year's and happened to be on Valentine's Day. So I did special themed shows those days, so you're going to get to a mode in there where it's like, why are all these songs related to Christmas or whatever? But yeah,
that's awesome.
Right on.
Well, if you're looking for your new music fix, that's about as good a place to go right now. Feel free to rewind 30 seconds if you need to hear those addresses again. We'll make sure that we put them up in the Twitter account as well. But now we're going to go back to the future, I guess, with when I went on Bob's show, how long ago in the quarantine?
I think it was
Bob?
last summer, wasn't it?
Last summer, yes.
Right?
It was.
Yeah, right.
You were one of my earliest guests. You were probably one of my first 5 or 10 guests I had.
Well,
Absolutely.
Bob, that John texted me. He's like, I'm going to be on a guy's podcast. I'm like, whoa, other people are hearing us. So that was kind of nice. That was good validation there.
Yeah.
And I think one of the dreams I had was I've told these guys, I said, it's great that people we know listen to our podcast, but what I really want is about 100 or 200 other people just like us who like old music, new music, and are like music files. And, when you've described your journey, you're exactly the type of person that I wanted to listen to your podcast, and you listen to our podcast. So it's fantastic.
Definitely.
And when we went on that podcast, though, we talked about returning the favor, and I said you could pick any album you want to talk about, and you had mentioned that Who's Next by The Who was the album you wanted. And we have officially arrived. It's 1971. The Who, Who's Next? What is it about this album that makes it the album that you could pick of all the albums in the world?
I consider this to be the greatest album of all time, just bar none. As a matter of fact, it's not difficult. It's not one of those things where, God, I'm not sure. No, it's just slam dunk.
Number one with a bullet. Okay.
Yeah, it's a slam dunk. And it's just never gotten old. I mean, you think about 4 or 5 of the songs on that album have just been played ad nauseum on classic rock radio. Half of them are themes to various CSI series. I mean, so it's like they're constantly in the public consciousness, but I never, ever get tired of any of it.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny you say that because we did John Lennon Imagine directly before this. And that, of course, has Imagine, which is a track that has sort of transcended that album. And I feel like this album has 2 songs that I feel totally transcend the album in terms of just how omnipresent they are. At track 1 and the last track. And then Behind Blue Eyes has been covered about 900 different times, and also covered with people just changing one of the words along the way, too. So you've got 3 iconic songs. Pretty much. I always think, what's that? Kelly Clarkson, who did Behind Hazel Eyes, right?
I did not know that. Yeah.
So I think what I'm going to do, and this is the first time that we're ever bringing in somebody as a 4th person. We kind of know where you stand on this album. I'm going to turn it over to Matt and Josh and say, do you agree? One of the all-time bests that we've listened to? Would you argue? Would you say there's a different take? Do you find yourself somewhere in the middle? Now, we've done a couple Who albums before. We've done Tommy, that was before this. We've done The Who Sell Out, and we've done My Generation. So we've got 3 different iterations of The Who.
And Live at Leeds.
And Live at Leeds as well. And we'll listen
now,
hot take.
It's interesting you mentioned Tommy and Live at Leeds, because my argument is, and this may be where you guys take an off-ramp from my line of thinking, but I honestly think that not only is Who's Next the greatest studio album of all time, Live at Leeds is the greatest live album of all time. And I would argue that Tommy is one of, if not the greatest concept albums of all time. So, and those were one after the other. You got Tommy, then Live at Leeds, then Who's Next. So that's just an incredible run right there of those three.
So there's 3 different concepts to go. Who's Next, which we haven't talked about, concept albums and live albums. Let's go to you, Matt. Go ahead. Are you going to challenge that? Or are you going to come on board?
Not
or
directly.
Are you gonna,
No, I mean, I can't say that I have the love affair with the Who that Bob seems to have, but I do like the Who a lot. And this is my favorite Who album for sure. One thing that I've always said about the Who is that they have 2 of my all-time favorite opening tracks, and that is in this album. Bob O'Reilly is just a great opening track. I mean, just everything about it. The little synthesizer thing that Townsend starts playing with on this record is just very cool. It's kind of all over the place. It's very it's totally interesting, right? And and then the piano comes in and the drums, and it's just like it kicks right off. Great opening track. And I also feel I love the opening for Tommy as well. The overture is just a great synopsis of the album that's to come. All the great parts, the horns, everything else. So I've always thought that about the Who. They can start an album, like for sure. We've talked on this podcast a lot about how I've been a greatest hits kind of guy, growing up trying to like get caught up with all the music from the 60s and 70s. There was no Spotify. I didn't have enough money to buy every record, so let me get a greatest hits. And I did have a Who's greatest hits album, but the Who was one of the bands that I did delve a little bit into, and I did get this record. And one of the things going back to it this past week, I only listen on this podcast. I don't listen to the bonus tracks because that's been a thing. So once the 90s hit and CDs came out, all these, let's throw on all these, demos and
deluxe editions.
Yeah, yes. Deluxe editions that go very long. And that's the version of Who's Next that I had, which has about like 5 or 6 extra songs tagged onto this. Now those songs are very good and I do like them, but I like the shorter, conciser album, and I was shocked to see that it ends at Won't Get Fooled Again, because I'm like, well, this is like a regularly sized album. This is like 45 minutes long, as opposed to, well, now I've got another 25 minutes of music to go, which is okay, but it's hard to kind of, as an album, I don't know, I'm realizing more and more that I like the more condensed albums. Keith Moon is insane on this. His drum fills are so prominent, and yep. I just love how he seems just to throw them in at little places that you would not expect, and that's one of the things I love about Keith Moon's drumming. But you've got rock songs, you've got great arena rock anthemic songs on here, and then you have beautiful melodic songs like something like Behind Blue Eyes. And Getting in Tune was a song that when I first heard, I was like, whoa, what is this? Should have been how is this not a single like that? The melody behind that is beautiful. I can't say enough good things about this. It's not my favorite album of all time, and actually, I don't know what is, to be quite honest. And so I appreciate, Bob, that you're like, it's not even a question, right? Like it amazes me because there's so many great albums out there. To be that definitive, I totally respect that. And if you're gonna go die on that hill with this record, I am certainly not going to argue with that. No, this is a classic album, and it's right up there with the best that we've heard so far on this podcast.
Before we throw it to Josh, Bob, anything you want to respond to with what Matt talked about there?
Well, no, I appreciate Matt's input there, and I like what he said about, the bonus tracks, because the fact that this album, I'm not sure how much you dug into the whole backstory about the Lifehouse project, but that's one of the reasons there were so many, extra tracks on here was, that whole thing got scrapped, and it's really, really a pretty incredible concept. But the producer, Glenn Johns, he really convinced them, even if you're scrapping Lifehouse, don't scrap a lot of these songs. These songs are really incredible. Yeah. We can make something out of it. It doesn't have to be a concept album. I think Pete was really in that mode still. And they also felt like, they needed to have a really huge, strong follow-up to Tommy. But the other thing about this album is it's got one of the most legendary classic covers of all time. Yep. The cover, and I read a little bit about that, and I didn't realize until checking into it that a lot of that was born out of a discussion that John Entwistle and Keith Moon were having recently seen 2001, The Space Odyssey, and they're like, well, how can we, take the piss on the whole monolith thing. It's like, well, we can literally take a piss on the monolith, So that was a great backstory.
So I never knew that. That's where that came from. I was hoping we were going to cover that. Like that's
with the prominent urine stains on the monolith, which is my favorite. I remember seeing this album in my dad's collection. Yeah, and it was the type of album cover that immediately I was like, I want to hear what that sounds like because I like what it looks like.
The other thing that I found out was hilarious is Pete was the only one who actually peed. The other three, they had to pour water to replicate.
I was going to say, did you do 3 stripes? Yeah.
And the sky was photoshopped in after the fact, too. They wanted something that looked almost pseudo-apocalyptic, so it looks seamless to me. I never knew it was,
that's pretty good photoshopping for 1971.
Yeah, really is.
Yeah, especially in the context. And while we haven't done a bio for this album, Bob, yet, we're doing this interview in place of it. I'm going to kind of go into some of that stuff when we do Quadrophenia, which we'll cover as well. We did go into depth about Tommy, and what was being referred to there with Lifehouse is this is sort of the concept album that was supposed to be in between Tommy and Quadrophenia, but it ended up being a scrap project, and Who's Next was some of the pieces that would become this album. So there's the very brief context of that. We can go on and on for that.
That's amazing that this album is basically like, well, here's the leftover stuff that we just kind of had, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's born of failure almost in a sense.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know anything about the rock opera stuff until I kind of started looking into it too, and it's amazing that I think I saw that he was having a nervous breakdown too, trying to figure it out, and he couldn't put the pieces together. So it's just he really responded to he really wanted to do another rock opera. It's just kind of crazy.
Some of the details and the concepts from Lifehouse were really kind of groundbreaking. He foresaw things like virtual reality and the internet in a sense. I mean, there were really some things that he kind of foresaw in kind of incredible fashion.
Absolutely. And before I give my take on next, there's something I want to add to that. Josh, let's let you get in with your editorial opinion right now.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this album as well. I think I like Live at Leeds more, just because I think that is the epitome of what I think the Who sound like, is that live feeling, and they're really bringing it all on that. And this is a slight less step down. I mean, this is probably their best studio album. It's definitely my favorite studio album of theirs that I've heard so far. I love the fact that you listed the 3 famous songs on here, but I love the fact that every other song on here is good. The only song I didn't like that much is My Wife, but I thought all the other ones were really strong, and I listened to them over and over again.
Well, the Entwistle contributions are always interesting because they tend to be polarizing one way or the other. Some people think they're the lost gems, and some people don't. You don't feel it congeals with the rest of the album, right? So in this case, it sounds like it didn't hit for you.
And I was going to say it was actually supposed to be on Entwistle's first solo record, and they threw it on because they needed one more, which is weird because they didn't put Pure and Easy on here, which was one of the other tracks for Lifehouse. That would have been a perfect fit because that's a great tune.
Well, they name drop that song in here too, right? They do the part of the Pure and Easy, towards the, I forget what song it's on.
I think it's The Song Is Over.
The song is The Song Is Over. Yeah. So that's a great song too.
And I've said that the one thing I will say about The Who is I think they are the best non-album track band potentially that ever existed. We've talked about the Beatles, the Kinks, and The Who all basically having 3 albums with singles, and I think The Who might be the best collection of songs that weren't ever on an album that just float around. If Matt's listening to a greatest hits, for example, so that kind of continues that theme with that track being another hidden gem not on this album.
Yeah, this album sounds really great on headphones too. I listen to it multiple ways. I listen to it on my TV speakers, which are pretty good, and then headphones just really fills in everything more. Not only are Keith Moon's drums, like Matt said, amazing, and he just seems to come in at the perfect time every time on different and fill in different ways. But the bass is great on this as well, and everybody and Roger Daltrey's scream, which is now famous, but I mean that's an iconic scream, and he's really bringing it. I didn't even really know until I was looking at the album that they switched singers in Bobo O'Reilly right at I didn't know Townsend was also singing on that at one point.
It does the bridge. Yeah
so that's what happens when you start researching these albums after listening to them. You pick up these little things. But yeah, this is a really great album. I was lukewarm on Tommy. I actually enjoyed the movie in companion with that, but I love Live at Leeds, and I like that early Who stuff as well. So this is great, keeping with that.
Gotcha. Anybody want to jump in before I give my 2 cents?
I'll just say too, like, I didn't know before this week that My Wife was an Entwistle song. I thought that was Roger Daltrey singing that. But I do like that, and I think it fits in fine here. Like I don't think that there's any misplaced song on here, particularly with the actual version of the album that I was listening to this week. Yeah, that was kind of a surprise to me too. But I did like that song.
Yeah, 2 of my favorite songs on this album are ones that don't get mentioned a lot. Would be Going Mobile and Loving for Keeping.
So glad you mentioned Going Mobile, because that's almost my favorite song on the album.
Yep. The lyrics are amazing on that.
How that hasn't been used in a million car ad campaigns by now.
Probably too expensive at this point.
Yeah. Although name your price, they'll offer it up. There's no shortage of Who licensing.
Well, and we talked about that on the Who Sell Out, that they very early said we have absolutely no problem licensing out our stuff. And while you might think that this is tongue in cheek, this is also very, very true. We will sell you our stuff. Before that became, a thing that everyone had to do as a second revenue stream or third revenue stream, depending how you look at it. A couple things I wanted to bring up that haven't been mentioned yet. If we talked about the idea of Black Sabbath, I kind of banged the drum quite a bit that the Black Sabbath album was in my opinion, the first heavy metal album that encompassed all of the tropes of heavy metal, right? And I think in many ways you could make an argument that this is the first arena rock album. Now, there's a lot of arena rock, and some of it's terrible, and some of it's, surprisingly good or depending on your taste. But I think this is where the sounds of this album, sonically, the rhythm section, which we've talked about a ton, but, Moon and Entwistle and the big sound of that rhythm section, the soaring vocals of Roger Daltrey, even compared to, 60s Who, Pete Townshend's guitar and his construction of these songs, even, Behind Blue Eyes is like a ballad that people would sing with the lighter up. I mean, they're all tropes now, but, when you put it in the context of 1971, this, to me, is the first arena rock album. I'd be curious to see what you guys think about that. Would you agree with me? Would you say you're barking up the wrong tree, John? I hate arena rock. Can't believe you put this in there. Or even, what your idea of arena rock is. Do you not think it encompasses it?
Well, no, I agree with you. I don't know if Led Zeppelin would also qualify because they're kind of concurrent at the same time. And they kind of meet the same sort of bombastic, loud guitars, and also an amazing drummer there. So maybe they're on equal footing with the Who.
It's definitely the first music, in conjunction with Led Zeppelin, where it's probably almost ideal for a stadium crowd. And if you think about it, before 71, there probably weren't many bands that were touring stadiums. I know the Beatles played Shea Stadium, but of course it was probably cordoned off to about a third the size of the facility. But other than Woodstock, there really hadn't been any large scale show. I mean, even Live at Leeds. I mean, that's basically being played at the cafeteria at Leeds University.
Right.
I mean, it sounds huge, but it's in a tiny venue. So it's this. I agree with you totally on that.
Yeah, I think the production and this is a very full album in terms of sonically. There's it's even the songs that are slower, slower paced. It's a very full sound. It's well produced, and it's made for that. And I agree, John. It's not, when you think arena rock, it's not just big boisterous, soaring guitar solos, but it's also the ballads, and you do get that on here as well. And you're right. I could totally see, the light, put the light up, or the lighters up for getting in tune or whatever.
The production was a huge factor because Townsend had a falling out with Kit Lambert when they were trying to put the album together, and that's when they brought in Glenn Johns, and he was one of the ones that really was a proponent for the big sound, really, and he even got, I know, Josh, you mentioned about Keith Moon. he had to alter his technique slightly because of the types of fills and stuff that he had previously used to really go for that bigger, more bombastic sound, and it paid off. I mean, and it's a combination of that and then the innovation of Townsend incorporating the Moog and the synthesizers, the stuff that really hadn't been used for this type of music very extensively before.
I feel like you keep beating me to a thought, Bob, by a couple sentences.
And
one was that, oh no, that's a good thing. That means we're thinking the same way. If we did a bio, I probably would have spent a good amount of time talking about the production of this album, because one of the things I've always been taught by my dad, who's a gigantic Who fan, he would probably agree with you, Bob. He'd have top 5 for sure. This album would be for him. But there's like the two Keith Moons, right? There's the 60s Keith Moon, who was doing these atypical fills, depending on what he was doing, he was playing around with stuff. And then there's 70s Keith Moon, who's just
like this.
He's
hold his drumsticks at a downward angle.
Well, and nothing was intuitive. It was almost like how jazz drummers hold it upside down, like how Stuart Copeland would hold it with the Police, right? But 70s Keith Moon, who some people are not as big a fan of, but other people, it's like that's the definitive drum sound. It's the big Keith Moon drum sounds, like sonically exploding in your ears. He always was there, but you'll see in the albums in the 70s, it's a more steady sound from him. Whereas in the 60s, he's a total wild card. Of course, substance abuse also altered, Keith Moon's reliability at live concerts too, as has been mentioned quite a few times with The Who. But the synthesizer is another thing I want to mention, because Townsend's doing things with the synthesizer here, and, the Moog, which is a Combing the Stacks Hall of Fame instrument for us at this point. I think Nicky Hopkins also plays the guitar on this or the piano on this album.
Does he really? God, that guy is everywhere.
I don't think there's an album he does not play the piano on between like 1967 and 1971. But yeah, he's on the piano on this. But they're really doing things with the synthesizer here that much like a lot with The Who, they did stuff first, and a lot of the stuff they did was redone so often that it became cliches. So when you talk about it, it can for some people sound like a bad cliche, like, oh, synthesizer rock. But The Who always got there first, and they always were one of the best to do it. And that's basically the case with the synthesizers here.
Yeah, it was augmenting the sound. It wasn't dominating the sound.
Yeah, it was still the 4 of them, but then they added these interesting things into it.
Well, and Josh, you always mention like the Doors with the organ, right?
Yeah.
And you feel that it dominates the Doors, right?
Yes, definitely.
Kind of does, though. I mean, that's their sound.
Well, and synths can dominate too, right? But I never feel the synths dominate in this.
No, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Another point about Moon and Zeppelin was that Moon and Bonham, I think that's one of the things that there's another similarity there, and that's part of that sound, is they were both, at least during that 70s stretch, both just such powerful drummers. And that I think you had to have that for that arena/stadium rock sound.
Yeah. Bob, you ever seen them, The Who?
I have not. It's very tragic. I wish I would have. But I remember I was still in high school. In '82 was when they had their final concert, and it was broadcast on the radio live and everything. And at that point, Moon had passed away, but they still had the main three. And I guess it wasn't until John Entwistle passed away, probably 10, 15 years ago, maybe a little more, but it didn't seem like that long ago. But when they were still playing, and I really would have loved to have seen him at least when they still had those three. And now that it's just, Pete and Roger, it's like, I still would like to see him, but I don't know, it's not as urgent.
Well, and we've talked about, like, when does a band go from being a band you love and you want to hear their albums, and then a live band, and when does a band that you love, their albums, no longer become that live band that you want to see? And The Who might have jumped that shark.
And a lot of it depends on who the members are. Like I've been a fan of Cheap Trick forever, and I finally got to see them probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And at that point, Bunny Carlos wasn't in the band anymore. So I was moping around a little bit about it, like, oh man, I wish it would have been all 4 original. But they sounded great. It was just like you would have seen them back in the late 70s. So it just sometimes it just depends on who is or isn't there.
Well, and it's also like, does your act age well? Because some acts don't age well. I saw Van Halen 10 years ago, and the first time I saw them, their act aged really well from a nostalgia standpoint. But then you saw them maybe 4 or 5 years later, the second time I saw them. And, you kind of seen the best shot you had there, and a little bit was lost,
Yeah, but at least we saw them when Eddie Van Halen was still alive.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. So, any final thoughts on the album that we haven't touched on yet?
It's going to be hard to top this one. I'll be interested, not knowing Quadrophenia, I'll be interested to see how they can try and top this album.
Oh gosh, it's a very different album.
I assume this album sold well and was well received and all of that.
Yeah, it was critically incredibly well received. Yeah. Most critics called it the #1 album of the year. Well,
actually, it was number 2 of 1971, behind
What's Going
Black
On?
Sabbath. Black Sabbath.
Oh no,
Paranoid.
nope. John.
In 1971.
Yeah.
Oh, Carole King.
Nope.
Zeppelin 4?
Zeppelin 4. Yeah.
Zeppelin 4, yeah.
Zeppelin 4.
That makes sense.
That gets the number 1.
I've got it up right now. In 71, it was voted the best album of the year in the Village Voice. Rolling Stone had it as the second best album of the year. And retrospectively, some folks didn't love it. Well, they loved it, but they said, the commercialization of it hurt it a little bit, but that's a very small minority. I think it's still considered to be one of the that somebody described it as one of the first albums that would be the equivalent of the literary canon of classic rock, like Who's Next would be in the top tier books of the music canon of classic rock. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would agree with that. Mm-hmm.
It's an incredible year for music when you think about what was released that year. And I just found out a couple days ago that Apple Plus, the streaming service, is putting out an 8-part docuseries all on 1971. So I'm chomping at the bit to see that because obviously this is going to be a big feature in there.
Well, Josh,
we've been talking about this left and right, yeah.
Josh, didn't you say that was based on the book that I just got?
Yeah.
It's based, because my brother just got me that book that it's based on. I started reading through it. It goes through each month. And it's just it says a couple of pages on here's what this artist, here's what Carole King was doing, and here's what Marvin Gaye was doing. And it's just boom, boom, boom. It just takes you through the whole year. But yeah, I guess it's going to be on Apple, so it's perfect timing for us.
So many legendary artists that was right in their peak period, like the early 70s period, the Rolling Stones and the Who and Zeppelin and so many of them. It's just, and Marvin Gaye, all those artists, and for it to all really kind of Bowie even, they're just all at that same time. It's just incredible to think about. And the fact that they were the topic, the material, not only was the music good, but the subject matter was very socially relevant.
Well, and you can even do deep cuts, too, because we're doing those cold listen hot takes, and you've got, Parliament Funkadelic kicking around there. You've got, people like Bill Withers, who we're going to do this, next cold listen hot take, who's doing stuff that's well received. So even beyond, the classic rock albums and the classic R&B albums, you've got the beginning of, krautrock is starting there, which became a thing throughout the 70s. Metal, is starting with Black Sabbath in 70 and continuing in 71. And best ever albums, the most albums of any year that are in the top 100 is 1971. I checked all that. So it's that's most, cool. It's the highest ranked year from 1960 to the present in terms of depth of albums.
Yeah, yep. And the author of that book starts off in the beginning. He's talking about how it is he's saying it's the best year ever, but he was of course in high school / college when that year happened, and he goes, I know everybody says that the best music was when they were from when they were in college, and he's and that those opinions are all true and they're all valid. He goes, but there's one difference between that and what I'm saying is that I'm right. That's what he's like. So there you go.
You want to guess the next 3 years in terms of most depth in a year according to best ever albums?
Gosh, of all
78
from 60 until present.
I would say 1978.
It's in the top 10, but it's not 2, 3, or 4.
I have no idea. I don't have enough knowledge for this.
82. I don't know.
No. Josh just threw a dart at the wall.
Number 2 is 1991. Which makes sense when you think about it.
Okay.
Number 3 is 1968.
Okay.
Covered a lot.
Yep. And
not 69, is that?
Nope, it's 68, believe it or not.
Yeah, wow.
And number 4 is 1985, which surprised me.
Almost guessed 85.
Which surprised me until I saw the albums that are on there, and it is a pretty remarkable set of albums. And it's
Purple
another
Rain,
thing.
Songs from the Big Chair. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of big records.
Talking Heads, I think.
Yeah.
It's another year where so many people are in what would be considered to be their peak period or zeitgeist. You've got The Cure, The Smiths, REM, and indie rock is exploding all over the place. Along with, deeper, you mentioned the Replacements before, but you've got them, Sonic Youth is starting to come up. You have really big pop albums, like big pop albums that also were critically well regarded are in that period. All kinds of different stuff. It was, when I saw it was very interesting to see. It's a potpourri of music. I would have maybe guessed the other ones, 91 and 68, but I would not have guessed 85, but it makes sense in retrospect. So
yeah, the reason I was thinking of 78 was that was the year there were so many legendary debut albums. You have Van Halen's first album, The Cars' first album, you have Devo's first album. You have a lot of massive big debut albums, but there were a lot of big records released that year also. Boston's second record. There were I always have thought of that as being a huge year, 78.
I bet you that's the highest.
That's a great year.
I bet you it's the highest selling year because you have, we didn't even talk on like the disco albums of that period and some of the pop albums of that period. That's the height of record buying. Yeah. I bet you 1978, because that Boston album, even the second one sold a bajillion copies. Rumors was a year before, right?
Rumors was 77. Yeah, it's sandwiched right between the Rumors being in 77 and then the Wall of 79. So you've got
exactly
right in between there.
What about that Saturday Night Fever soundtrack? That sold
that was 70 copies. Well, yeah, I think it was 77, but 78's probably when they sold most of the records. Because it would carry over. It was the movie came out in the fall of 77. So
John, are you saying like what year did the actual sales occur for the biggest, or
when
like
it was
the year
released?
that the album that came out? Yeah,
the year it came out. I think if you took the album and put it in the context of the year it was released
and overall
added up the gross sales of all time, I bet you like 1977 to 1984 would have almost all of the biggest years, would be my guess, when you think about the albums that were released in that period. Yeah.
That sounds like a good cleaning of the stacks for next year.
And that's encompasses the entirety of my high school years, because I was in high school from 80 to 84. So
you might have to write a book.
The records.
Yeah, and we might have to have you write a book where you challenge that guy's assertion about 1971, and then what we'll do is we'll write something about the early to mid 90s being the peak period to be a teenager. Yeah, exactly. So then reinvent it along the way. So this has been
to wrap this up, Bob. This was 38 of all time on best ever albums, so it's 37 behind your rankings.
Man, that's tough.
Yeah, and Rolling Stone even had it at 77 in their most recent.
Yeah, it dropped in the on their list. It's people need to keep in mind it's old, but it's good.
Yeah.
I think best ever albums has that way too low in the 70s. They said 38 in the 70s?
No, 38 of all time.
38 of all time.
Sorry,
okay.
10 in the 70s was number 10 in the 70s, and 2 in 1971.
Well, we know Best Ever Albums has a bias for Pink Floyd, so I would imagine they have 4 or 5 of them in there.
Pink Floyd, Radiohead, and the Beatles are pretty much all in the top 10 of all time.
I'll take this one over any Pink Floyd album. No offense to Pink Floyd at all or fans of Pink Floyd, but yes, this one's going to be in my top 5. Yep. This one's going to be in my top 5 of the 70s. I am very confident. The only things that are going to be pushing it are going to be some pet favorites of big guitar rock and then some of the punk albums that are going to come in the late 70s, which, encompass some of my favorite bands. But in terms of early 70s, it's funny because this Sabbath album that we did this week, Paranoid, and Who's Next could very well be my 2 favorite albums from the period of 1970 and 1975.
Nice.
And they happen to be on the same show.
So, Bob, it's safe to say The Who is your favorite band since you listed that as your favorite.
Yeah, I would say they're my favorite band of all time. I mean, I stated the case for the records, but I also feel like you could make a case, almost unequivocally, you could say Entwistle's the greatest bassist ever.
I've made that case here a lot of times. They know they can vouch for that.
I think Moon, it's hard to, Neil Peart and Bonham and Stuart. You mentioned Stuart Copeland. He's definitely one of my favorite drummers. But Moon is definitely top 3 or 4 drummers of all time. Mm-hmm. And Townsend's no slouch. And Daltrey's definitely up there vocal-wise. So you literally have a super group of guys that just, by osmosis, they're not even from other bands. It's just these guys ended up together and they all dominate at their respective positions. So.
That's always my dad's argument for the Who. They're a top tier at every single position. There's nobody who's just average or weak. They're all tippy top tier. Yep.
Well, it's amazing. You're right. It's amazing how everybody, it just happenstance, right? Right place, right time, and it just all gels together. And it's.
Well, and by the way, Pete Townshend's a tippy top tier songwriter, and they probably revolutionized about 4 or 5 things that became parts of what rock became. Concept albums, stacking all the amps and stuff to make that gigantic sound. The sound that very much pioneered what punk would become later. Synths early.
The antics, right? The trashy guitars, the windmill.
Touring in the way they did, they were one of the first to tour that way. I mean, we can keep going because they did a ton of them. So, and we'll end with this, guys. I know Matt has said he doesn't have a favorite album, and Josh, I don't know for you. Since Bob shared the Who are his favorite band, do you guys have a band that you would call your favorite band?
Oh, sure.
Mm-hmm. Is yours the Beatles, Matt?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. Is yours as definitive the Beatles and Radiohead is a 1-2 as Bob's favorite album?
Yes, I can say that definitively. It goes Beatles, Radiohead, 1-2 for sure.
Gotcha. How about you, Josh?
I don't know. I don't know what my favorite band is.
Okay.
I don't even know what my favorite movies are. I mean, they always rotate. So,
well, put it in the context of who do you have the most albums by?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
That's a good question.
Well,
because that usually do ask that, right, Bob? That's one of the questions that you ask.
Yeah, who do you own the most? And a lot of times it's how many does somebody have in their catalog? Like for me, I probably have more Elvis Costello than anybody, but a lot of it's just he's been at it for so long and has released so many records. So
right,
yeah,
depth of quality.
Well, I probably have every Beatles album, so they might be de facto. I have every Led Zeppelin album.
Okay.
I have every Jay-Z album. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a big 3 right there. They're probably 3 of the highest selling artists of all time. So I have long answered that question as The Clash would be my favorite band of all time.
Ooh,
good. There's others that could knock on the door, but there's no band I go back to more often than The Clash. So I think that's my one. Maybe not as far ahead as you guys with favorite album and Matt with his 2 favorite artists, but The Clash would be my answer there.
Yep.
And Van Halen a number 2, John?
I love Van Halen, but I wouldn't put they're like a visceral thing, but in terms of entire catalog, you have to ignore the whole Van Hagar period, which is a big black mark right there. I think my second would actually be REM.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
That's also a really good one. John, what's your favorite Van Halen album?
Oh gosh.
There is a right answer.
It's got to be one. It's just jam-packed. If I were to pick my favorites, one would still be my favorite. And I actually think Fair Warning might be my second. Yeah.
There you go.
That's what Bob wanted to hear.
That's the right answer.
Yeah, Fair Warning might be my second. It's just Van Halen 1. It's hard to not listen to that album. It is. Yeah. But yeah, Fair Warning is definitely my 2.
Yeah, people just do not appreciate that album. And I recently listened to another podcast that did an episode on that record, and it just reminded me, damn, that is such a good record.
You want to talk about opening tracks that are incredible. That one has one of my 5 favorite of all time. So, yeah, I won't spoil it for those that have never listened to the album. Go listen to Fair Warning.
Are we covering that, John?
No, but we should.
No,
we cover the only ones that are on Best Ever albums are one in 1984, unfortunately, but maybe in a bonus episode. Yeah.
I think my favorite Van Halen song is the a cappella "Running with the Devil," David Lee Roth version of that.
But the isolated David Lee Roth screams and yelps.
Well, maybe we might have to. We might have to bring you back on, Bob.
He doesn't even sing the chorus in that. The chorus is this empty space in that part because he's not even singing it.
Well, it's Mike Anthony and Eddie Van Halen harmonizing.
Right. And it's funny that 2 of your favorite bands are Van Halen and REM, who have the 2, in my opinion, greatest harmonizing vocalist bass players of all time.
I would definitely agree with that.
And Michael Anthony.
No doubt. In fact, they're the 1 and 2 on the Mount Rushmore that is
the secret weapons of those bands.
Absolutely. No. Mike Mills is the secret weapon REM.
Bob, Fair Warning is 30 in 1981, 311 in the 80s, and 1,941 of all time. So
I understand that. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but for
Check
me,
it out, though.
It can't be beat.
Check it out, and also check out Who's Next by The Who. And I think based on our recommendations from the other segments, all 3 of our albums this week. A really good group of 3.
I'm trying to think, have we universally panned any albums from the 70s yet?
From the 70s yet?
I wasn't
it's
wild
harder.
about the Yes album.
Oh,
or the Doors, for that matter. Although we did like LA Woman the most. I think all 3 of us did.
You guys didn't love that Sly and the Family Stone album either.
No, that's true. I wasn't a huge fan of that. I like the Stand better.
And of course,
I kind of feel like Sly and the Family Stone is really an ultimate singles band. Their albums don't hold together as well.
I agree 100% with that. And I will mention also, Matt, that you hated the James Taylor album. So
I did hate the James Taylor album. That's true.
If you haven't listened to that, that's an all-time great segment on the show.
My dad brought that up. He was like, wow, Matt really hates James Taylor.
Was that Sweet Baby James?
Sweet Baby James, yep.
For good thing for me, it was a cold listen hot take, and I only had to listen to it once. So I win.
There you go. Well, Bob, I'd like to thank you so much for swinging by. It was a lot of fun. Maybe sometime down the road when we get to Van Halen or, Elvis Costello, we'll bring you back on for a round 2.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. And need to definitely have Matt and Josh on Bend and Scoop as well, because we want to make sure and get their take on their musical history as far as the records are concerned.
Be careful what you wish for.
Oh, I got good stories, man.
He does. Matt does have good stories. Well, thanks so much. I think we're going to tie it off right there for this segment.